Electricity costs in the Philippines remain among the highest in the region.
Why is the price of electricity so high?
The Philippines is surrounded by some of the most abundant energy resources in Southeast Asia. It has sunlight almost all year. It has enormous potential for solar and wind power. It sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, giving it significant geothermal resources. It has substantial potential for hydropower and offshore renewable energy. And yet, electricity in the Philippines has remained among the most expensive in Asia. That sounds like a contradiction. If a country has so much renewable energy potential, why does electricity still cost so much? The answer is that electricity prices are not determined simply by how much energy exists in the ground, the wind, or the sunlight. They depend on how that energy is produced, transported, financed, connected to the grid, and delivered to consumers. And the Philippines faces several disadvantages at the same time. The first is fuel. For decades, the Philippine power system has relied heavily on imported fossil fuels, particularly coal and increasingly imported natural gas. The country has domestic energy resources, but they have not been enough to eliminate dependence on international fuel markets. The depletion of the Malampaya gas field has made the situation even more complicated because existing and planned gas plants face greater exposure to imported LNG prices. That means a major part of the electricity bill is ultimately connected to prices determined outside the Philippines. When international coal, oil, or gas prices rise, Philippine electricity generators can feel the pressure. And when fuel has to be imported, the country also has to pay for shipping, logistics, foreign exchange, storage, and other costs before that fuel ever produces a single kilowatt hour. This became painfully obvious during the energy shock of 2026. Fuel disruptions connected to the conflict involving Iran caused electricity market prices to surge, forcing the Philippine government to intervene and temporarily suspend spot market operations. That is the fundamental problem with a fossil fuel-heavy electricity system. Even if the power plant itself is efficient, the country remains exposed to the price of the fuel. And fuel is only the beginning of the story. There is another reason electricity is difficult to make cheap in the Philippines. Geography. The Philippines is not one giant piece of land with one giant power grid. It is an archipelago of thousands of islands, with major population centers separated by seas and mountainous terrain. That creates an enormous infrastructure challenge. In a continental country, a large power plant can potentially supply electricity across a huge interconnected network. The Philippines has to build transmission lines across long distances, submarine connections between islands, substations, distribution networks, and smaller generation systems for areas that cannot easily be connected. The result is a power system that is more fragmented and more expensive to operate. The country's major electricity regions, particularly Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, are increasingly interconnected, but constraints remain. In June 2026, the country's electricity market operator reported that tighter regional supply conditions, outages, transmission constraints, and reserve deficiencies contributed to higher market prices. This matters because electricity is unusual. You cannot simply produce a huge amount in one location and cheaply store it for later. Supply and demand have to remain balanced almost instantaneously. So if electricity is available cheaply in one part of the country, but the transmission network cannot move enough of it to another part, consumers in the second location may still face high prices. Now add renewable energy to the equation. The Philippines has enormous potential for solar, wind, geothermal, and other renewable sources. But building a renewable power plant is only half the job. The electricity also needs somewhere to go. A solar farm can produce cheap electricity during the middle of the day, but if the transmission network is congested, some of that potential can be wasted or restricted. Wind farms face similar challenges, and solar and wind are variable. They do not necessarily produce electricity exactly when demand is highest. That means the country needs stronger transmission networks, storage, flexible generation, better forecasting, and smarter power market systems. The irony is that renewable energy can eventually make electricity cheaper, but reaching that cheaper system requires enormous investment first. The Philippine government and ASEAN are therefore pushing greater regional electricity connectivity, including stronger implementation of the ASEAN power grid. The goal is to make electricity systems more interconnected and make it easier to integrate renewable energy. So the problem is not simply that the Philippines lacks cheap energy. It is that cheap energy is often difficult to move, balance, and deliver. This is where the Philippines faces one of its biggest energy decisions. Should it continue relying heavily on conventional power plants while expanding renewables? Should it move aggressively towards solar, wind, geothermal, and battery storage? Or should it bring nuclear power into the mix? There is no simple answer. Renewables are becoming increasingly attractive. Solar panels and wind turbines can produce electricity without requiring continuous imports of coal or gas. Once a renewable project is operating, it does not need to buy fuel every morning to keep generating electricity. That gives renewables a major advantage in a country vulnerable to international fuel price shocks. There is already evidence that increasing renewable generation can put downward pressure on electricity prices. In the first half of 2025, Philippine spot electricity prices fell significantly, with increased renewable generation helping displace more expensive sources. But renewables cannot solve everything by themselves. A modern economy needs electricity at night, during storms, during periods of low wind, and during sudden demand spikes. That means renewable energy needs a supporting system. It needs batteries, it needs transmission, it needs flexible generation, and it needs enough reliable capacity to keep the lights on when weather-dependent generation falls. This is where nuclear power enters the debate. The Philippines has revived serious discussions about nuclear energy as part of its long-term energy strategy. The argument is straightforward. Nuclear plants can produce large amounts of electricity continuously without directly burning coal, oil, or gas. They could potentially reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels while providing the reliable electricity needed to complement solar and wind. The International Energy Agency says nuclear interest is growing across Southeast Asia because countries want firm, low-emissions electricity and greater energy security. The Philippines is among the countries pursuing nuclear development targets, but nuclear power is not a magic solution. The Philippines would need strong regulation, highly trained workers, public confidence in secure financing, and a project delivered on time and within budget. A nuclear plant can take many years to plan and build, and if construction costs explode, the electricity may not be cheap. That is why the real question is not whether nuclear is automatically cheap or expensive. The question is whether nuclear, renewables, storage, transmission, and other technologies can be combined into a system that produces reliable electricity at competitive long-term costs. The Philippines does not necessarily need one energy source to win. It needs a better energy system. This is not just an argument about electricity bills. It is an argument about the future of Philippine manufacturing. Factories need reliable electricity. They need it every hour of the day, every day of the year. A semiconductor facility, electronics manufacturer, food processing plant, steel producer, or chemical factory cannot simply shut down whenever electricity becomes too expensive or unreliable. Power costs therefore become part of the country's cost of doing business. And that matters enormously because the Philippines is competing with countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others for manufacturing investment. If two countries offer similar wages, similar infrastructure, and similar access to global markets, but one offers significantly cheaper and more reliable electricity, manufacturers have a powerful reason to choose that country. High electricity prices can therefore become a hidden tax on industrialization. They raise production costs, they reduce margins, they can discourage energy-intensive investment, and they can make Philippine-made products less competitive in international markets. This is why fixing electricity prices is about much more than helping households pay smaller monthly bills. It is about whether the Philippines can move further up the industrial ladder. The good news is that the country is not starting from zero. Renewable investment is growing, the grid is being expanded, regional power connectivity is becoming a bigger priority. And the government is exploring nuclear power as another possible source of reliable, low-carbon electricity. The challenge is coordinating all of these pieces. Imagine a future Philippine electricity system where solar produces huge amounts of cheap daytime power, offshore wind contributes additional generation, geothermal provides dependable electricity, batteries shift energy into the evening, stronger transmission lines move electricity between regions, and firm generation provides backup when renewable output falls. That system could dramatically reduce the country's exposure to imported fossil fuels. And reducing fuel imports would mean reducing one of the biggest sources of uncertainty in electricity prices. But getting there requires investment, it requires better transmission, it requires faster project approvals without sacrificing safety, it requires competitive electricity markets, and it requires long-term energy planning rather than changing direction every few years. The Philippines has an unusual energy paradox. It has enormous renewable potential, but a difficult geography. It has growing electricity demand, but an infrastructure system that needs major expansion. It has access to clean energy, but significant exposure to imported fuel. And it has ambitious industrial goals while still facing some of the highest electricity costs in the region. So why does power cost so much? Because the Philippines is paying not for one problem, but for several problems at once. It pays for imported fuel, it pays for a fragmented island geography, it pays for transmission constraints, it pays for aging infrastructure and the cost of building new capacity, and it pays for the complicated transition from a fossil fuel-dependent system toward a cleaner and more diversified one. The long-term opportunity, however, is enormous. If the Philippines can turn its renewable resources into reliable electricity, strengthen its grids, diversify its energy supply, and make smart decisions about technologies such as nuclear power, electricity could become more than just cheaper. It could become a competitive advantage. And that may ultimately determine whether the Philippines remains a country that imports expensive energy to power its economy, or becomes a country that uses its own energy resources to power a new era of industrial growth. The Philippines does not have an energy shortage. It has an energy system challenge. And solving that challenge could change the price of electricity, the competitiveness of its factories, and the country's economic future. So the story of expensive electricity in the Philippines is not simply a story about expensive power plants or rising fuel prices. It is the story of a country trying to build a modern economy across thousands of islands while depending too heavily on energy that has to be imported. The Philippines has the resources to change that. It has sunlight, wind, geothermal energy, hydropower, and potentially nuclear power. What it needs now is the infrastructure, investment, and long-term strategy to turn those resources into reliable and affordable electricity. Because cheaper electricity would mean more than lower household bills. It could mean cheaper products, more competitive factories, more foreign investment, more jobs, and a stronger Philippine economy. The question is whether the country can build that energy system quickly enough. So what do you think? Should the Philippines go all in on renewables, seriously pursue nuclear power, or build a combination of both? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this video useful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the economies, industries, and infrastructure shaping Asia. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.